Hey, Jerry, how are you today?
Doing really well, Alan. I'm looking forward to this little chat we're going to have, something totally different.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of a recap. Well, not really a recap, but I mean, I guess we're at the end of quarter one for GaleForceWins and a little bit of a conversation of kind of where we've come and maybe a little recap of the episodes we shot so far. What do you think of that?
I like it. If you look at the screen here that I'm sharing, we started this. Our first episode was me and you having a chat about where we're going to go with this, and that was on December 6th, Alan. And I got to tell you, it's interesting. A good bit of time has passed, not a lot, but we're up to 19 actual episodes posted. We got three more in the can, so to speak. So, what's your first impression of where it is right now, based on where we thought it was going to go?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jerry. I mean, a lot of water under the keel since we started this thing. I mean, the initial conversation was around thriving in remoteness and really building off our own personal experiences of navigating through the pandemic and creating businesses and getting involved in new things. We wanted to get other people's story around that, and it started off as that, and it was an amazing journey. And here we are 4 months later, and things have grown in a direction that I'm quite happy with, for sure.
Me as well. I mean, when we did this very first episode, we knew we enjoyed each other's banter, the conversations that were inspiring to us as we, went through the pandemic. But I think you said to me one day, Jerry, why don't we invite someone to this conversation and record it? So that's what we did. So let's talk a little bit about what we call episode number 2, but it's actually guest number 1, Al Mulholland. I was totally blown away by this conversation.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Jerry. So I've known Al for a long time. Al's an adventurous spirit, obviously, in what he did here, sailing solo across the Atlantic a number of times. But I think the real takeaway for me with Al Mulholland was when he talked about living in the moment, when he said, this is what's happening right now. This is the experience. You're in the middle of it and appreciate it. And I have to tell you, since that episode, I try so very hard to take Al's words to heart and do exactly that. I'm in the moment now. I'm in the moment with you on this podcast, and I absolutely love the direction we're going. So thanks, Al Mulholland, for that piece of advice.
Well, let's just look at this picture. This sums up the Al Mulholland episode. He is on, I can't remember the size of the ship. Oh, there it is there, 26-foot sailboat. Think about that. We're all metaphorically in a sailboat sailing throughout the world. It just isn't as visual as what we're looking at right here. The fact that he could be thrown over the side at any moment is why he has to live in the moment. So yeah, that's the takeaway for me too, living in the moment. Let's move on to guest number 2. Guest number 2, episode number 3, was Russ Tidbury, a great guy, someone you brought to the table, Al.
Yeah, Russ, a great fellow, right? Russ done a lot of things in his life for sure. Falkland War vet. I mean, had a full career in the Navy. Went on to do some great things in the defense industry. But the really fun thing about Russ is that inside he's just got a great genuine sense of humor, doesn't take things too serious, keep things pretty level, and he really does understand the importance of a solid foundation and family and things like that. I really enjoyed Russ's episode. My takeaway there was just keep a sense of humor about yourself as well.
I agree. And it's funny, and looking at these early episodes and the way I was packaging them, I'm sure Russ is really appreciative of that picture that I froze and put in there for him.
Yeah, for sure.
I think the thing that really sticks out for me is the fact that he's a veteran of the Falklands and how that changed his life forever. So I think in our lives, there's very, very important pivotal moments, and how you react to those moments is how you live the rest of your life.
Yeah. Well, Russ has lived a good life for sure.
So Michelle Tessier, this was a little teaser that we put up, but it summarizes a little bit about her passions. I really enjoyed this one. I think she was only the 3rd woman to ever command a naval warship. I've been on a naval warship. I've had responsibility on a naval warship. Nothing close to what she has had in terms of being the top dog. But that one was really something to listen to her talk. And, I really felt good for her as a woman being able to take command of one of the most powerful pieces of machinery in the world.
Michelle is a great story, right? I mean, from humble beginnings down there in the Burin Peninsula in Newfoundland, goes on to do amazing things in the Canadian Navy and beyond on the other side of her life as well, and theater and in her passion for nature and all that. I mean, just a well-rounded person for sure. But the really interesting thing about Michelle is she's now at the tail end of her military career and focusing on what's next. And Michelle Tessier is one of those people, whatever organization or whatever group she gets involved with, she's going to bring success. So whoever captures Michelle Tessier in the next part of her journey, they're going to be a lucky group for sure.
Yeah. And, this episode for me actually started to solidify that we were onto something with our little podcast, because the feedback we started to get from people saying, thank you for giving us a role model, from not just females, but males. There was a lot of feedback when this episode was aired. So that kind of sits well with me.
And that really opened up our relationship with the Canadian Navy as well, which was great.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I really appreciate that. The next episode was, I think, for me, one of the most challenging episodes, bar none. My brother served with Kirk over in Afghanistan. And thank you, John, for bringing us Tina. Tina lost her son in an IED explosion in Afghanistan. And I still get emotional thinking about it, but the resilience that Tina has shown in the face of unimaginable tragedy, Allan, is got me, thanking every moment that I'm alive.
Gerry, you summarized it perfectly. It's that, to me, the takeaway was resiliency, pick yourself up, move on. I mean, a devastating thing happened to Tina and her family. And here she is telling the story, inspiring others to pick up and move on. It was incredibly emotional, incredibly hard to do, but my summary of it is, it was just an absolute honor to be able to do that. And I really appreciate, certainly, Tina, what she was able to provide us.
We talk a lot about vulnerability, and I reflect on this one because I kept saying to myself prior to doing it, who are we to have the audacity to sit and talk to Tina? Very early on in this little initiative that we have on the go, that's really taken on steam. But I really started to have a lot of self-doubt, because it's like, why should we, Allan, have the right to even be in the same room with someone who's just done such an amazing thing to keep surviving and thriving in spite of the tragedy. So, Tina, if you do watch this video, thank you for your sacrifice, which is just beyond imagine.
100%, and for Kirk, lest we forget.
So this one is near and dear to my heart. I love golf. I've been in pursuit of breaking 80 for 54 years, soon to be 55, assuming I started when I was 1 month old. Yeah, Michael Ecagini, just a fine young man, Allan. The future of Canadian youth is well served with this young man.
Oh, yeah, for sure, right? I mean, my takeaway from Michael's conversation was, level guy, comes from great Cape Breton roots, right? I mean, basically has the world in front of him, right? I mean, what a position to be in. You're 18 years old on a golf scholarship in the United States, following a passion. But Michael is a level guy. He's just taking it all day by day, like a true Atlantic Canadian. He's just going to let this evolve. I would say Michael Ecagini is living in the moment. It was a great chat that we had with Michael. It was a real privilege.
Well, one thing I'll say about golf, and I'm going to criticize hockey now, or a lot of other team sports. You take a shot on goal, and guess what? You miss it by 20 feet. 10 feet, 5 feet. That's not good. You're a professional hockey player. That being said, you have a contract, you're making millions. In golf, what I like about it, and I'll say about hockey now, if you keep missing the net, eventually your contract will dry up. That being said, you got one shot in golf. You miss that shot. Like, you cannot miss very many shots as a professional golfer. So that's what I like about the game of golf. And you miss the cut, you don't get paid. To me, golf is the epitome of the entrepreneurial endeavor.
Yeah.
I know that's a little deep, but anyway.
I'm not sure I agree with your hockey analogy, Gerry. I mean, the Leafs still get paid. They're missing a lot of shots. Anyway, that's bound to rile somebody up.
Yes, we're going to lose some followers after that. Thanks a lot. I'll let you talk about Badimka.
Well, where do you begin, right? I mean, our other guests talked about, the respect that they've had for new Canadians coming and starting life fresh. Well, this is that story, right? I mean, Dr. Badimka arose, her husband, Lawden, 2 daughters, Isadora and Sarah. They leave Sarajevo in the middle of a civil war and start their life in Canada again. And my takeaway from that whole conversation was, being thankful for the freedoms that we have, the little things that we often take for granted. Gerry, you and I, we live by the ocean, and I'm sure that we drive by scenic views every day and we take them for granted. And that's the way I look at Canada. Sometimes we take a lot of stuff for granted. And Badimka, she brings that point home, like, just don't take things for granted. Live in the moment and appreciate the things that you have. And the story was truly inspirational. What a lovely family. And I can't wait for them to move to Atlantic Canada this summer. We are very fortunate to have that caliber of family arrive in Atlantic Canada and add to the beautiful fabric that we have here already.
Well, you know what? I'm going to add to this. There's a this is a very hot immigration in Newfoundland right now. Is a very hot topic. There was something that happened. I won't get into all the details, but someone very critical of immigration. What my experience with immigration has been from the moment I was in university, and that's when I really started to be exposed to immigrants, their perspective has opened my mind. You and I, Allan, grew up in St. John's, not of wealthy families, but when you reflect on it, privileged, incredibly privileged to grow up in one of the greatest places on earth. But Imka, on the other hand, had to literally overnight leave everything. The number of people that I've met that have left places that are just not fit to live anymore is amazing. And we need more immigrants in Atlantic Canada. That's all I'll say about that.
Sure.
We don't want to get on a soapbox here, but that's my point.
Yeah.
Dave Steeves, what do you say, Al?
Well, so there you go. So this, our relationship started with the Navy, with Michelle Tessier. And then, of course, the Navy wanted one podcast per month to feature one of their sailors. And the first person they gave us was the head sailor in the Canadian Navy. So Chief Petty Officer, First Class, Dave Steeves. Now, there's a guy you want to talk about a level. Here's a guy that just keeps it on the level. From Moncton, New Brunswick, good Atlantic Canadian kid. He knows that the position he has is vital and important to the institution of the Canadian Navy, but he also keeps things very much in perspective. Dave Steeves is a true leader. Dave Steeves is the kind of guy you need on your team if you're going to succeed. The Navy's lucky to have him. Atlantic Canada is lucky to have produced him. And I'm excited to follow Dave Steeves and what's next on his path.
I was really taken aback by his willingness to be vulnerable on our call. It wasn't my experience, frankly, 30 years ago in the military. Of course, you're young, you're impressionable, but guys like David scared the living daylights out of me. I was really, really taken back by how open and vulnerable he was. And that's important, as we've talked, Allan, about leadership. You got to be vulnerable. If you're trying to present yourself as something you're not, Who's not vulnerable? Everybody is. What we're learning, and all these CEOs we're talking to, every one of them are vulnerable. And if you're willing to show that, that solidifies your leadership.
Yeah. Yep. Dave's true Canadian hero right there. Very inspirational conversation.
Adam, talk about Adam. Allan, you brought Adam to the podcast, and is just a brilliant person.
Yeah, Adam's one of those guys, right? And we talked about it on the podcast. He's one of those guys who put his finger anywhere on the globe and say, I'm going to live there and make a living there. Adam brings to the conversation something very important in the world today. That Adam is a climate change expert. He's a climatologist. He understands climate change, and he started this business back in the 80s, the very time when we were making bigger internal combustion engines to burn more gas. Adam was in the conversation to say we're going the wrong way, and he's still in the conversation, adding a great deal to the conversation. Are we ever lucky to have that caliber of person here in Atlantic Canada making a difference for the world, but doing it right here in Atlantic Canada? Adam's a good fella. And as I said in the podcast, he's just a nice guy. He's the kind of guy you want to go out supper with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Just to have someone of Adam's caliber on to talk about what's incredibly important, especially for all of us in coastal communities. Adam is the guy. If you haven't watched this episode, please do. If you don't have time for the episode, go search Adam's work and read about it, because it'll only make you better.
Yep. Charlie
Oliver, what do we say about Charlie? Charlie, during the pandemic, was doing a kind of a podcast, not a podcast, but he was on the board of trade for St. John's, and it was fearlessness, not carelessness. This is a man who doesn't need to be spending time talking about these types of things, but he does. He wants to give back. Serial entrepreneur. He's a very motivational individual. His health, his mental capacity, all of those pieces, Charlie weaves into a wonderful story, and it's one that I think we all need to listen to.
Gerry, my big takeaway from Charlie Oliver, and I've lived by it since the conversation: big ideas and big actions, right? It's all well and good to have the big ideas, but you got to act too. And that was my takeaway from Charlie Oliver. I very much enjoyed that conversation.
I agree with you 100%. He is the epitome of a serial entrepreneur who just keeps getting things done. And yeah. I'll tell you, I did a video of him in 1992, 93. And when I saw him on the Board of Trade webinars, he was saying things that were exactly what he was saying 3 decades earlier when I recorded him at the Positive Thinkers Club. So that's when I reached out to him. I said, Charlie, you haven't deviated one bit. Imagine you stay true to your principles for decades.
I look forward to
saying more.
I look forward to getting him back on the podcast.
Yes, I agree. 100%. Steve Farmer, tell us about Steve. I tell you, I this was a bit of a deviation in terms of the topic, but it really sucked me in.
100%. Sometimes it's nice to have a little deviation from kind of the norm in the conversation. And certainly Steve provided that. So Steve is an anesthesiologist by profession, works right here in Prince Edward Island in the local hospital. Has served in the military in the Prince Edward Island Regiment, but he's found a passion in beekeeping. And his passion in beekeeping is only matched by his ability to articulate how it all works, because he tells a wonderful story of bees and how they all work together. Like it's a fascinating journey he takes you on around beekeeping. It's a nice little hour deviation away from the mundane of life, because it offers you a lens into something you perhaps have never seen before. Steve Farmer's a great fellow for sure.
Well, you know what? My takeaway from this is, I've been 30 years in business development. I've really worked hard. That being said, how many days did I drive to the office and not pay attention to the bees?
Yeah.
Not smell the flowers? My commute nowadays is literally about 2 seconds from upstairs to down. At some point, we'll get back to it. But ever since this episode, and I see a bee, I think I stop. I think that's what this pandemic has done. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, folks, look at the bees that are flying by every day. What do we say about this episode? Beep.
Well, that was a great episode, Gerry. I mean, so here's a woman who's building an incredible emerging industry, I would say, right here in Atlantic Canada. We call it emerging because we to many who are not involved in the gaming sector, it seems like a new industry. But to people like Beep and her brother, and indeed those that are in the industry, it's been around a long time. But they've chose to build it here in Atlantic Canada. What I really liked about this conversation was Beep talked about walking in to an office with the government, and she got such a warm reception from the government, and then a warm reception from the academic institutions. And that showed me the importance of government, industry, and academia all working together. With that warm reception and that willingness to grow together, to see that rising tide float all boats, what was created out of that was an industry that has offered a lot of people great paying jobs, raised a lot of families over this industry that Beep and her brother and the broader community have brought to Atlantic Canada. It was a fantastic episode.
Well, it was interesting. I've known Beep and her family for many, many decades. When she talked about her brother, I mean, her brother's had phenomenal success in the United States. One of the leading gaming developing companies in the entire world, Newfoundlander. And the one thing that really struck me is she said, until he actually did something here, he didn't feel like he had made it. And I'm like, that is incredible. With someone with that much success, thinks that way and is willing to come here, bring their mind power and their financial power to put it together. Is just one of those stories, Allan. They Beep put the Atlantic Canadian operations together from virtually nothing, and thank you. That's all I say. We need more like that. I know you always end the podcast. We need more people like Deidre Ear. Well, you know what? That's the truth.
Yeah.
Matt Corbett. Oh man. Tell us about him, Allan.
Yeah, well, it's the second episode really for the Canadian Navy. So he was recommended, of course, by the head sailor in the Navy, Dave Steeves. Dave said, well, you got to talk to this guy. My takeaway from the Matt Corbett conversation is when opportunity knocks, take it. Matt Corbett is the type of guy that if there's an adventure, this guy's on it, right? And such an amazing journey he's already had at the age of 30 years old, right? And his willingness, his lust for life, it's unbelievable. His willingness to be a part of something, to try something different. I was inspired. Like I told my son who just joined the Navy, I said, you got to watch Matt Corbett. I mean, this guy is what you kind of want to do when you join the Navy. Yeah, for sure.
Well, you know what, Allan? On that point, family, we talk about family a lot, and I agree with you 100%. I love the fact that you're encouraging your son to watch the content that we are posting. I agree. I do the same thing with my children, but Matt is interesting. You and I, we walk on the earth. Matt dives under the ocean, sails on the ocean, walks on the earth, and jumps out of planes. And now his ambition is to become a pilot. So I guess the next thing would be to be an astronaut. That's, and go to Mars, maybe. I don't know. Like there's no bounds to where he wants to go.
And Matt, I hate to stay on it, but his willingness just to ask the question, I'd like to do this. Will you support me? He's got the courage just to ask the question. Most people in life stop right there. They just assume the answer is going to be no. So why bother asking? Matt just assumes the answer is going to be yes. So I better ask. It's just a beautiful way to approach life.
Well, I've had some interaction with several of our guests. The one with him was one of the funniest ones because he said to me, like, the response to this has been overwhelming. And he goes, Gerry, the other thing, he said, I've actually beaten out Chief Steve's on the number of views. So it showed me he doesn't care who. It might be his boss, but he's beat him out he's competitive even with his own boss. So that was cool.
He was, for sure.
Vianne Timmons, Allan, it's interesting. I live here in St. John's, but you brought Vianne to the podcast, and I'm glad you did. Tell us about it.
So Vianne, president of Memorial University, and you want to talk about from humble beginnings. I mean, coming out of Labrador through Cape Breton, going on to have leading roles in academic institutions across the country, and then to finally come back and take Memorial University in a direction that I think is very, very healthy, to see the importance of connecting with community and industry and everybody growing together. I mean, Memorial University is in the center of what's happening in Newfoundland and Labrador right now, and you could not find a better leader in the moment to take that institution, and indeed, I would argue, the province to a better place. So it was just a wonderful conversation with a genuine leader who I think is going to take Newfoundland and Labrador to a new height.
I agree 100%. I'm not going to talk anything about the podcast. What I'm going to do is tell whoever's listening to this right now about the backstory. We had been talking to Vianne's assistant, and I got a warm feeling right from the very beginning. The interaction was so genuine. But the thing that really struck me the most is that this recording happened on a Monday or a Tuesday. I can't remember which. I think it was a Monday. When the Friday before, St. John's in Newfoundland basically got shut down solid by the second wave and the COVID variants. So I was like, oh dear, I guess, given that Vianne is responsible for the university, who, by the way, was mobilizing to bring all the students back. So we ended up regressing because of COVID so dramatically, shut everything down. Vianne said, nope, I've got an appointment with Allan and Gerry, and I am going to keep it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you right now, that is leadership at its finest. This podcast is still in its infancy. For her to commit to that just blows me away. That's an important backstory.
100%, Gerry. So, and Memorial University, great things. So if you're somebody out there looking for an academic institution to be involved with, if you're a mom or a dad or an aunt or an uncle that's providing advice to somebody that's looking at post-secondary education, I mean, I can't, with leadership like that, Memorial's on the right track. I'd give them a look for sure.
Education is one of the keys to inspiration and hope. Let's face it, Allan. Yep. Atlantic Canada, the world needs this type of education and inspiration. Let's face it.
Yeah.
Wow, sure. March. We're moving into March. This one was a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure it was. So third episode for the Canadian Navy. And so this is Karina LeBlanc. She's an honorary captain in the Canadian Navy. And what I really enjoyed about this conversation with Karina is, Karina is a natural leader, and she's a driven person in her athleticism and so what she's providing to the Canadian Navy in terms of her drive and her determination to be a part of the conversation, to help the institution grow and be relevant, it's impressive. But what I really was moved by on that conversation is she felt so humbled to be a part of that. She felt like they were offering her so much. So it's like the perfect collision of an institution that has providing her so much and she providing it so much. I mean, it's a perfect match, and I can't wait to hear the results of that conversation that Karina and the Canadian Navy have and the direction that they take together. It was a remarkable conversation, and just she was so full of life. It it made me feel really good about myself when we finished the podcast.
Yeah. And, we usually have, 5-10 minute preamble to get to know our guests prior to recording. I really enjoyed the banter with Karina because she interviewed us, and I loved it. It was like, well, gentlemen, why are you here? It was phenomenal. But the other piece out of this that really struck me was being in the moment and living up to what you say. When she found out about her friend, and I can't remember the young lady's name that actually eventually passed away, the fact that Karina took the time to fly from wherever she was to St. John's, took the time and the money to say hi to that family who were grieving, speaks volumes. If you haven't watched this episode, watch it.
Yeah, 100%.
What do we say about Craig Rowe? What do you think, Al? I'll let you talk first because I know Craig well.
Yeah, well, I mean, there you go, right? So here's a guy, Craig Rowe, being involved in a lot of different entrepreneurial adventures and the like in Newfoundland, and finds himself on boards and committees, and now working with Technology Newfoundland to help other companies and in the technology sector to grow. In my opinion, Craig Rowe is the lubricant in success. Okay, he's the guy that positions himself so that he can help others be successful in what they do. We often talk about government, academia, and industry working together. Well, Craig Rowe is the kind of guy that makes all of that happen. And it's people like Craig Rowe that this whole country needs so much. People with vision and an ability to see the parts connect together. It was a fascinating conversation. And it's because of guys like Craig Rowe, I'm so excited to see where Newfoundland and Labrador and Atlantic Canada in general pivot out of COVID-19 and how we evolve into a better place, more engaged in what's happening around us in the technology world. That was a fascinating conversation for me.
Absolutely. And we really thank you for giving your time, Craig. But what gets me is that the man is building a worldwide technology business, but still gives the time to the why locally, why Canada. He's on risk boards. He's chair of Tech NL. I've probably forgotten most of what he's chair and volunteering on. That is giving back. But I tell you that the one part that keeps sticking out in my mind as I walk around and do my daily thing is that he talked about adversity. And the one thing, Allan, he said to me that keeps sticking in my mind, he said, yeah, I've got this problem here right now. This is not taking me out today.
Right. Yeah.
Like that. Craig, God bless you. And he said, you do that enough times, and he's been at it for 15 years. That's not taking me out today. Adversity hits you next week. That's not taking me out. Nothing is going to take him out. Keep it going.
It was a wonderful conversation. And it was one of those conversations, Gerry, that if you want to learn some Newfoundland expressions, that's the one to tune into, because Craig had a few of them for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Why do we say we deviate a little bit from the entrepreneurial side of things? But you know what? That's probably not true, because I'm an amateur musician. And what I'm seeing, musicians have honed their craft. So many of them have an entrepreneurial side to them because they have to either have a little school or a large school, like teaching students. What we see with Spirit of Newfoundland, it gives me a great sense of joy. Not only are they creating a business and employment, they're providing enormous comfort through culture. Well, these two are off the charts when it comes to music. Ofra, one of the most celebrated cellists in the world, and Mike, a trumpet player who actually is a multi-instrumentalist, but who just blows my mind, continues to keep me excited,
Gerry, I don't know where to begin with this particular podcast. I mean, I too felt, okay, deviation. from our normal path around celebrating success and business and technology and stuff like that. But indeed, this was not that at all. It was truly a celebration of entrepreneurship. It was truly a celebration of technology in action during COVID and how they bring their art form, to the public. And it was, to me, this was one of my favorite episodes that we've shot because it was an absolute beautiful love story intertwined with entrepreneurship and just a willingness to evolve their music, evolve their art, and take people in and go in different directions. I really enjoyed that episode, and so much so, almost every day now I listen to cello music as a result of that. And I know that we've introduced others to that particular issue, but that was a really interesting conversation. And I think that it was right in line with exactly what we're all about, is celebrating success. And these folks are so successful in their relationship, in their art. And finally, my final point to that is, we talk about entrepreneurship, we talk about technology, but it all collided with that creativity piece that finds itself in spades in Atlantic Canada. And this episode was just perfect.
I tell you, Allan, I'm still in awe of it. I'll tell you, I'm gonna be honest with something. We are inspired by what we're doing. I will tell you that when you get inspired, there's times when you can be so inspired, you get off the rails. And I will tell you one thing that I've been off the rails with, and that's my fitness. I've been so excited about what you and I are doing. I'm working with Newfound Marketing and just growing business. I haven't gotten out of this chair enough. And the reason I'm bringing it up right now is that within the last, since this episode, I've gone for walks, I've put Spotify on in my headphones, and I've tuned into Offers music. And I agree with you 100%. I'm a jazz trumpet player. I listen to jazz music. Classical, I've listened to, and I like it, but I've fallen in love with the cello. And when I walk around, there's so much noise out there right now. When you have a cello playing, it's just beautiful. So anyway, we're gushing about it, but it deserves to be gushed about.
Yeah, it was a great episode. I couldn't agree more. I do all my grocery shopping now with Mike and Oprah's sounds in my ears. So if you want to talk to me at the grocery store, you got to speak loud because I'm listening.
Yeah, I'm with you. And it's funny, and the other thing, and we talk about this in the episode, the mixture of a cello and a trumpet or a flugelhorn is not a very common mixture. But in the song that we use as the soundtrack, Let Me Fish Off Cape St. Mary's, Mike bends a note.
Yeah.
And if anyone listens to it, you'll hear that note bend. It is absolutely beautiful. And as a trumpet player, I can bend notes, but often I bend them to the wrong tone. Anyway, he's, it's just amazing what he's doing. Anyway, we got a couple more. Craig Tucker. Wow.
Right. I mean, where do you begin right now? Here's a guy that, inspirational, unbelievable. This guy has done so much in marketing and advertising throughout Atlantic Canada, then stops that journey in his life and goes on to take over the family business, which his mom started in the basement of the house and his dad was involved in, and he's now taking it over and accelerating Kean College to the next level, preparing them for what's next. I mean, the whole conversation with Craig before we went on air and after we left air was incredible. I am so inspired by the things that Craig told us about the direction that we're going with this podcast. It solidifies to me everything that we're doing. We're on the right path. We are celebrating success. We are celebrating people like Craig Tucker, who are going on to inspire people one person after another. It was a fantastic episode.
Yeah, his support of this initiative that we have has been instrumental in giving us the inspiration to keep going, frankly. I can't help but tell everybody that, a gentleman like Craig has had a career, done extremely well, probably doesn't really need to be doing this, has taken on an enormous responsibility with an educational college that stretches all across Newfoundland. His words, and I've gotten a lot of feedback on Craig's episode, people sending me messages through LinkedIn, my Facebook page, telling me how inspirational it was. So again, just, thanks. It's another episode to watch.
Gerry,
we're going to go. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Craig's genuine desire to want to help others comes through. I mean, the world needs more people like Craig Tucker around so that we can all thrive. A really uplifting episode for sure.
Absolutely. Last but not least, the episode that we posted last night.
Well, an interesting one, right? Because this was to be continued. This is really only the first half of that particular conversation, and I don't think we want to give too much away. Leonard Pecor, I mean, where do you go, right? Here's a guy who had a career in the Navy, decided to return to school to look at doing something different. Went through the Marine Institute in St. John's, Newfoundland, formed his own ship design company at the end of that, put in the hard work, took the jobs that maybe nobody else wanted, celebrated every job that he had, learned from every job that he had, gone on to transition through a global downturn in 2008, keep the company intact, keep everything intact, stay true to his vision, and bases a lot of his success off where he is, basically physically where he's located, St. John's, Newfoundland, and the support and everything around that, the people that he works with. It's an inspirational episode for sure. And what I really like about that is Len's desire and honesty to give back, returning to his roots in the Marine Institute to tell his story, to inspire others, and his honesty about where his business was sitting at certain points and how he was going to transition out of that. And then I look forward to the second half of that episode, which I'm just going to stop there because that's worth tuning into to see where the company has since gone.
Yeah. And I've continued to reflect on this episode. It went live last night. I spent a lot of time over the weekend editing. And when you do the edits, you certainly spend time with Leonard again. We live through the episode and then you have the chance to review it. One of the things, Allan, that I'd say is that I met Len in HMCS Cabot in probably the early 90s. I believe he started Genoa in 1995. So what strikes me now is my recollection of Leonard then. Soft-spoken gentleman is how I would describe him, who's turned into an entrepreneurial giant. And you and I walk through our lives, meeting people, not having an inkling of what their future could potentially be or what they're even doing right now. This is where I am with Leonard. The fact that they had a near-death experience and he was sharing the fact that he went a little bit too long with too many employees and how painful that was, to now they have in excess of 250 people. Ladies and gentlemen, watch this episode. You're not going to be disappointed.
You won't be disappointed for sure. And there's a back half to the episode too, right? And which is very exciting. That was a really interesting episode for sure.
So we're almost finished with this little review. I will say that next week, as you can see, we have the CEO of Genoa, Gina Pecor, on. The week after that, we're going to have Chris Flanagan, who's the CEO of Baffin Fisheries. We have an episode in the can of a story around the crow's nest that will come up. We've got a couple of people in the hopper for the Navy. Allan, I've got a Zoom to go on now in a minute, so I just wanted to say, where do you see this going?
Listen, buddy, it's it's growing, it's evolving episode after episode in a direction that I think we're both very happy with. The conversations are great. I don't know about you, Gerry, but I find that I get inspired every time I talk to these people. I want to do more. So I hope that the audience feels the same way. I think we're going to get to the point where we'll start dissecting a lot of these conversations up so you can consume them in a different format. Maybe not listen to the whole hour, but consume pieces of it, and we'll get there. But that's all part of this whole thing growing. There's one thing about what we're doing here is we're not afraid to evolve. We're not afraid to change the approach. And the other neat thing, Gerry, and I'll end my conversation here, is that I find that the advice that we're getting or the conversations we're having from our guests are positioning our media empire here as we move forward. We're changing. We're listening to what they're saying. Big ideas, big actions, right? Live in the moment. All of those things, we're doing it. And I'm so very happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, I will say there's parts of my day that I find overwhelming, not from the perspective of, oh my God, there's too much coming at me. It's just the feeling of the people that we're talking about or talking to, and those that are watching it are getting something out of it. You and I are going to do another review episode, and I'll just mention it here now. Sometime in the next day or so, we're going to actually review a video that I shot in 1992. Jeff Sterling, on my LinkedIn page, I've posted some little clips of it. But I can tell you that episode that I shot in 1992 has motivated me for 29 years. I know that many of the students that were in that room listening to him talk that night have told me in the decades since that they reflect on it. I can only imagine how much motivation GaleForceWins.com, with episode after episode being added every week, is going to provide. This world right now needs this type of thinking. We're not interested in controversy. We're interested in what we've just discussed. I am bringing these thoughts to my workplace every day, and that's what matters.
We're celebrating success, Gerry. That's all it is. And hopefully our guests will inspire many people along the way, just like Jeff Sterling inspired you. I'm hoping one of our videos is talked about 30 years from now to say, that video inspired me right out of the gate. And you know what? The conversations we have can do just that.
Yeah. Well, Allan, this has been an absolute pleasure to reflect on, the little bit of work that we've done to date, and there's more to come.
All right, buddy. We'll see you on the next episode. Gale Force wins.
Two friends, Allan Dale and Gerry Carew, who grew up just a few streets apart in St. John's East End, have been separated by Canada's geography for 3 decades. They came together virtually during the pandemic to chat about like-minded interests. Allan lives in PEI and Gerry in Newfoundland. Thriving in remoteness has been a common theme for both of them during the pandemic. Gale Force Wins, the podcast is the result.
Thank you for tuning in to Gale Force Wins. That's GaleForceWins, WINS.com.